Welcome back to God's Lawyer Podcast. Atheists are intellectually dishonest and junk philosophers. Well, there it is. I've thrown down the gauntlet. It's time to go to war.
There's not a time zone in which he's not being praised. Listen to me, there is not a moment since the resurrection of Jesus where there's not someone somewhere declaring that Jesus saves.
In this episode, I want to talk about Paul Copan's approach in his book, That's Just Your Interpretation, responding to skeptics who challenge your faith. I want to do that, but I also, in light of that, I want to point out that basically that atheists pretend to be intellectually superior, but in truth, they are just babblers and junk philosophers. So in Copan's approach, he basically says he has this three-step approach. Now, if you want to pick up his book, you can look at it a little bit fuller. It's Paul Copan, That's Just Your Interpretation, Responding to Skeptics Who Challenge Your Faith. He has this three-step approach. Now, I'm not fully endorsing every single thing and everything about his approach, but I think we need to recognize that, look, we already have the high ground. Christian, you already hold the high ground. Yeah, there's some smart aleck coming along, and he's watched the History Channel, or he's read Christopher Hitchens' book that's basically been debunked. Richard Dawkins stuff. Okay, whatever. He doesn't hold the high ground. Christian, you hold the high ground. Okay, you can put out just a couple little questions that basically obliterate this whole idea that atheism frankly, it's not even a worldview. It's now, I guess in the truest scientific way, it's a worldview, but it's not. It's junk philosophy. Atheism is constantly trying. The whole goal of atheism, think about this junk philosophy, is to say, theist, you're wrong. That's it. It doesn't proffer a coherent worldview. The whole idea of atheism is to borrow from a Christian worldview and borrowing from it, whether consciously or subconsciously, trying to stand on it, saying, okay, by the way, you all are wrong. Okay, atheism doesn't start, if you will, in a pure, true atheistic sense, creating its own worldview and its own structures. It's constantly borrowing and then pretending like it's not. I mean, it's like the guy, listen, I love these guys, by the way, and I hate to make this analogy, but I have to. It's kind of like the guys, you see them driving around. And by the way, no disrespect to these guys. I appreciate the hustle, okay? But it's the guys, they're driving around, they got this beat up, run down truck. Hey, appreciate the truck. I'm not saying anything about it. I'm just saying you know them when you see them, right? And on the bed of the truck, they basically have they've got these wooden slats that they've kind of put around the side so they can get more junk in the back of the truck. Appreciate the game and the hustle. And what they do is they go around on garbage day and they're looking for scrap, like scrap metal and other junk that they go and then they turn into money. Hey, more power to you, okay? But what I'm saying is when I see those trucks, I'm just going to be honest with you. In my mind, that's the image of an atheist. He's just this guy. He's going around and picking up a little piece of trash here and there and acting as if, he's built something beautiful. No, I don't think so. You basically, the atheists are just like the guys running around picking up scraps out of garbage and then trying to resell it as something as if it's their own creation. Don't think so. We recognize the truth. And you're being called out. And don't give me this, I'm agnostic or I'm spiritual. Look, either be a theist or an atheist, okay? There's no room for this kind of, I'm going to waffle in the middle ground and, take this approach. That's intellectually dishonest, okay? That is truly intellectually dishonest. If you're saying I'm agnostic, that means you're saying I have no knowledge of. That's a truth claim, okay? So if you're saying I don't know that there's a God, or I don't, that's a truth claim. You're saying I have a truth claim that there's not enough knowledge to prove the existence of God, or not enough knowledge to prove that God doesn't exist. You're just waffling. You're trying to have your cake and eat it too, and you're just being intellectually dishonest. I don't really have an analogy for that person. I'll think of one later. I've already kind of used up all my analogies on the junk collector. So the three-step approach of Paul Copan here in his book is, I think, helpful and insightful. So he says, number one, truth. I want to talk about, okay, what is truth? Let's talk about truth claims. Let's talk about worldviews, the way you perceive the world around you, the way you interpret the world, and then Christian apologetics. We kind of move through these three. So let's start with, first of all, objective truth. Objective truth are the laws of logic, okay? The laws of logic are based on this idea that there's order and if you will, that we can know things, okay? So the alternative would be we can know nothing. But even saying, think about this, saying we can't know anything or we can know nothing, that in itself is a claim of to have knowledge. You're claiming you have a superior knowledge to claim that no one has any knowledge or cannot obtain knowledge. We live in a world where we recognize that by employing the laws of logic, and we can think about this as, for example, in science. Science, that word just means knowledge, by the way. We've adopted it as it's of a new word, and it's become somewhat of a religion. Scientism has become kind of a religion, with the quote-unquote scientist being the high priest of this religion. You know, scientists say. You always know when you're talking to an idiot because, and by the way, I've got some people that are so spiritual, they watch these episodes, and when I say things like idiot, and they get turned off, like, I can't believe a pastor would use the word idiot. Well, I guess that there goes, unsubscribe. So let's move on because I'm using it in its truest sense here. So you get this person, and they come along, and they're making these wild claims, but they truly don't have any basis or understanding of what they're talking about. And they'll say this. They'll say, "Well, scientists say, scientists have proven." Look, I'm just telling you, in the truest sense, you're dealing with an idiot. Okay, because this is somebody who's just like picked up a couple crumbs here and there and runs around and like spewing this out as if they understand things. They don't understand what they're talking about. They do not. And I think we've got to get back to a place and time where it's okay to refer to someone as ignorant. Okay, not in a derogatory way, but look, this person is ignorant. They're uneducated and they're acting idiotic. Acting idiotic is the opposite of someone who's informed and giving an informed view of something. And I can hear it now. The atheist watching this, he's an idiot. Okay, well then so be it. Then I'll wear that as a badge of honor. So objective truth. So we start with the laws of logic. That's what we understand. Objective truth understands that we can know things, and we employ specific laws of logic so that we can know and understand things. However, you see today this postmodern Marxist worldview has with the ideas that you determine yourself individually what is true, and that in itself is, it's counter to everything that we experience in life. So we know just because I say something's true doesn't mean it's true. For example, today we have this whole transgender thing. We say, well, someone who was quote unquote assigned a gender at birth, but then there's something else. Look, the reality is that, if you're biologically male, you're a man. And you can say, well, this is my truth, but that defies reality. And so, we used to talk about that being a mental health issue, and now it's celebrated as a virtue. You think about it. The spectrum is, the pendulum has swung very far. Number two, he says worldviews. So he gives you some examples of worldviews here, and a worldview has questions. Okay, so we talk about these objective. The objective truth can be known. It exists. We employ the laws of logic. So, here's the thing. If atheism is true, then how do we know it's true? Think about that. The idea undergirding atheism is there's no constant, there's no objective truth, there's no objective morality. If atheism's true, how do we know it's true? Let me just help you. Here's your run-of-the-mill, barstool atheist, okay? Well, I know it's true because you can't prove that God exists. There it is. That's it. Why don't you prove he doesn't exist? Oh, well, scientists have. They have? Well, they've proved evolution's true. They have? Show me the evidence. Point it out to me. Let's look at it. Now, here's the reality is that most atheists don't really stop and think about the reality is that how do you prove that atheism's true? No, we don't have to. We don't have to prove it. We just have to prove that Christians are wrong or that theists are wrong. Again, either intellectually dishonest or just junk philosophers or both. I mean, that's junk philosophy. And that's just garbage. That's just a garbage collector. I mean, you're just running around picking up trash and just throwing it around as if it, this is your creation. This is a product of your thinking. You're just picking up junk and then trying to resell it. Okay, it's not working. So a worldview is the way we understand and interpret the world around us. Okay, now for an atheist, it requires an intentional and willful suppression of things that are true, and that you, in your conscience, because you are created in the image of God, that you know to be true, and you must willfully suppress them. So even to proffer atheism, it requires a willful suppressing, and I think a very unhealthy way, of things that you know are inherently true. For example, like objective morals. I've already pointed out the fact that truth can be known through the laws of logic, these sorts of things. It requires a suppression of that. So a worldview seeks to answer the following questions, more than these, but just generally speaking, a question of origins. Where did we come from? Atheism basically says that we don't know, we're still trying to find out, but we're convinced that maybe there was an alien that came here and left life here, and of course no one knows where the alien's from. And but what we know for sure, there's no God. Oh, okay, that makes total sense. All right. Anyways, let's move on. Identity. Who am I? Well, I can tell you this. You go punch an atheist in the face, which, by the way, you should not do, or steal her purse, which you should not do, and you find out how quick this person wants their rights protected. But why do they have any rights? Why should they have any rights? See, atheism can't answer that question. You start hearing things like, well, that's what we've agreed on this in society. Well, what if society generally agrees that based on your skin color, you should be enslaved? Well, that's evil, that's wrong. Well, I agree that's evil and that's wrong, but I just applied your own principle to the situation. Well, society as a whole, what if society as a whole thinks that we should murder an ethnic group just because of their ethnicity? Well, that's wrong, you say. Well, of course I agree it's wrong, but applying your principles that, well, this is just what society generally agrees on, that's right or wrong. What if society agrees that tomorrow we all agree that, all atheists should go to prison? Well, of course, that's wrong. Well, again, yes, that is wrong. I would agree that's wrong. But I have a basis for why it's wrong. You do not. You're just saying, well, just because you think it's wrong. Well, so then are you the ultimate lawgiver? Should we impose then your truth claims on everyone else? See, that's the thing with atheism. The little sneaky truth here is that atheism wants to willfully suppress the truths that we know consciously through our conscience that are true. They want to willfully suppress those. They want to willfully suppress the evidence, the facts, as we look around us that points us to the truth that there is a God. They want to willfully suppress that and then impose upon you kind of a borrowed morality, a borrowed objectivity. And that is that what they say, so the ultimate goal here of atheism isn't to construct a worldview. It's to deconstruct Christianity or any other theistic worldview and to replace God. That is, the atheist wants to be God. They want to be God of, well, first of all, God of their own life, and then want to impose that on others and be the God of others' lives. So that's really what we're talking about here. So identity. Are you created in the image of God? Let me break this down for you. All right, so I'm going to show you theism and atheism right here, okay? Theism, you're created in the image of God. Atheism, you are God. There it is. Let's sum that whole thing up. Then you say, well, I'm agnostic. Okay, well, typically that's the cowardice position in between. Okay, that just gets no play here because it's pointless. It's a pointless position. It's again junk. That's junk philosophy as well because it's useless. You're making truth claims that you don't know the truth. All right. It's incoherent and inconsistent. So there's no reason to even entertain this idea of agnosticism. It's purely mythical. It's for those who want to sound intelligent and don't want to be put into a camp. I mean, just get off the fence. It's one or the other. Either you're created in the image of God or you are God. Period. You might say, "Well, I don't know what's out there." Well, then just go ahead and declare openly that you want to be your own God, and that way, we can all just be clear on this thing, or declare you're created in the image of God and you're accountable to the Creator. Meaning, what's the meaning of life? Well, again, I've pointed out almost ad nauseum, if you're an atheist, where in the world do you get a definition for meaning of life? Well, again, go back to the idea, if you are God, then you determine meaning. And in determining meaning, you determine scope. And of course, as an atheist, you get to determine who lives or dies. Okay, so now some might say, well, you've had Christians doing that. Like, I don't agree with this idea that anybody should be murdered because of their faith or non-faith. No, don't agree with any of that. And frankly, this whole idea of burning heretics at the stake, that was not Christian. And let me say this, we can think about the Roman Catholic Church sainted Thomas More. Thomas More was a terrorist. I mean, he had people in his yard locked up and were being abused on his property because they had a different view of Christianity. So no, he's not a saint. He was a terrorist. I can go through the list. We could look at more. I'm willing to call a spade a spade. I'm willing to call out those who claim to be Christians and who weren't. And so let's move on, though. With the meaning is clear. So look, you're either going to get meaning from the fact that you're created in the image of God and you've been given purpose and a role and responsibility in creation. But as an atheist, I mean, you get to determine that, I guess, right? I mean, you're God, so that means, survival of the fittest. Why would it not be okay then just to basically abuse everyone that's weaker than you, to take whatever you want? I mean, you get to define that meaning, and why would you be wrong in saying that? Why is that wrong? Well, it's because society says it's wrong. Yeah, but there's societies at times that have said it's right. So, I guess they were wrong. What if a society 100 years from now decides that's correct again? Again, so what happens with atheism is the person just simply becomes the ultimate, arbiter or determiner of all truth. And in destiny, ultimately, where are you headed? Here's the thing. I pointed this out before. I'll point it out again. I'm going to point it out 1,000 more times. Look, the reality is, atheist, if you are right, when you die, you won't even know you were right. Look, you say, well, is this some sort of like gamble? Like, okay, I should become a Christian because I'm hedging my bets? Absolutely not. This is not Pascal's wager. I am not doing that. No. Coming to Christ, serving Christ is a real thing. It's a real decision, and it matters. It's not like, well, just in case. Okay? So the truth is that if atheists are right, well, I won't know that they were right. They won't know that they were right, and I won't even know that I was wrong because there's nothing. There's no point. Realize this. I want you to think about atheism for a minute. Think about this. There's no point of having loved anyone. There's no point of any contribution that you seek to make, even in your own life. Nothing. You might say, well, I'm trying to be physically fit because I want to live longer. It doesn't matter. It's pointless. I mean, it's absolutely pointless. If you follow atheism to its true conclusion, it leads to nihilism. I mean, it leads to nothingness because there's no point. You say, okay, what's the difference if you lived 40 years or 70 years? There's no point. You say, well, that was 30 more years I got to enjoy. When you die, you have no reference to any amount of enjoyment, period. So it was pointless. You say, well, those 30 years weren't pointless. It was absolutely pointless, because when you are dead, you have no memory of it at all. And then everyone you knew and loved will someday too be dead and have no memory of you, your love, your affection, your contribution. You say, well, they'll write my name in a book. Well, the reality then is that if atheism is true and there's no destiny for any of us, at some point, now, of course, we're talking, it's going to take more years than I can count. The sun is going to burn out of energy. And because the universe is allegedly expanding, but even if it's not, the sun will eventually burn out of energy. At some point, it would be impossible for life to exist on this planet. So you can have all the books that you want, and the reality is that at some point there will be no one with no memory of anything, and all of this, absolutely all of it, would be 100% pointless. There's no reason to love. There's no reason to pursue anything. There's no reason to do anything. This is nihilism. This means nothingness. That's why atheists are junk philosophers. I'm just telling you, that's why they are. That's why they're intellectually dishonest, because if you follow this worldview to its ultimate conclusion, it leads to nihilism. Nihilism means nothingness. Nothing. Nothing matters. Nothing was important. You say, well, I'll live on through my kid. Someday they're going to be dead. Then and have no memory of you, no memory of their life, no memory of the contribution. Well, they'll pour it into their kids. At some point, everyone who knew you, loved you, that you loved, will be dead, and none of you will have memory of anything or anyone. That's the message of atheism. And if atheism is true, listen, there is no hope, there's no purpose, no reason. You say, well, let me go back to this whole nonsense. Well, I'm just going to enjoy my life while I can. Look, when you die, whether you had 1 day of enjoyment or 100 years of enjoyment, it won't matter to you anyway, because you will have no consciousness, no memory of it. Man, that's a hard truth. If atheism is true, that there's no meaning to anything. Nothing has meaning. Nothing. If there is a God and we're created in His image and we can know Him, our final destiny, our goal, pursuit would be to be in His presence. Whatever that looks like, being in His presence. Some say, well, that's a place called heaven. The Bible talks about a new heavens and a new earth. The new earth, our abode, the entire universe becomes, if you will, the temple of God. His presence is known, reclaiming what was lost when we fell in the garden. So let me go back to the third point here. So he has laws of logic, that is truth, worldviews, and in Christian apologetics. He says this: we should do this by inference to the best explanation. If you've noticed, that's a lot of what I do in apologetics anyway. I mean, certainly I believe that the Bible's the inspired word of God, and you might say, okay, what an idiot, what a backwoods Bible thumper. That's okay. I'll embrace all those as a badge of honor. But I can tell you this: we're going to have serious conversations about it. I'm not just going to waffle because you and a couple elitists think that in order to fit in with the in crowd, you have to completely dismiss special revelation outright. No, thank you. I'm a thinker, and that means that I'm going to work through this matter. Now, my definition of inspiration may not fit your definition of inspiration, and I'd be more than willing to discuss that at fuller and greater length. I don't have this, if you will, kind of this idea that the biblical writers went into a trance and then they wrote it out and that was the final copy and document. No, I'd like to talk to you about what that means, but that's not the point of this episode. So he says that you have to be more than, well, this isn't a direct quote, but this is kind of a sense of the thing, and I'm writing kind of a note here to myself, kind of as a sense of, I think where Copen is driving this conversation is that you're going to need to be more than a Christian apologist. You need to be acting as a Christian philosopher. And what's philosophy? It's a love of wisdom. It's someone who's seeking wisdom. So, look, you can quote Bible verses all day long, and that's a good thing. I memorize a great deal of Scripture, so that's a good practice, okay? But if you aren't willing to think through these issues, the level of if you will, interaction and the ground that we can take is going to be limited. And so let me be clear. The ground we're seeking to take is the intellectual ground, okay? We already have the high ground, but we want to take all the ground, okay? And certainly I don't mean to take the low ground, but I mean we claim the heights and we proclaim from the heights these truths. So he has this kind of the funnel of apologetics, starting with the laws of logic, worldviews, theism, and then he takes this. I'm going to quote him here. He says, "This is the approach." He says, "Let me present some important indicators of God's existence to illustrate what it means to infer to the best explanation." It's funny. You get some people that want to jump into apologetics, and they just want to keep quoting verses to people. And it's good to share Scripture with someone. We should never feel intimidated to not do that. We should share the truth of God's Word. But just quoting Scripture to someone, I think we've got to be prepared to kind of walk through this and say, okay, let's look at the evidence and let's ask ourselves, what's the most plausible, most likely answer based on the facts around us? So he says, basically, and he's going to walk kind of through a few things here, and I want to touch on each one real quick. So let me go back and quote him again here. He says, "Let me present some important indicators of God's existence to illustrate what it means to infer to the best explanations." In other words, he's going to kind of show you how this kind of works out, okay? So he starts with the universe, its origin is out of nothing. Okay, so you really kind of, here's the option you have, okay? So you have the universe, which it consists of we'd say space and matter. Now that's a very simplified way. It's obviously extremely complex, the universe and the building blocks of the universe. Although we can explain them in a simple form, they're also extremely complex. So you have to have, matter itself and the universe itself it's not alive. So we can distinguish between something that's alive and something that's not. And so just space and matter, that's not a living entity. So then what we have is we have this choice that you have space and matter, and they would need to be eternal. That is, they would need always to have existed. And then you have this idea that something that has no life in it can suddenly combust and create life, but not only create life, here's the part no one wants to talk about, but under this, I mean, you're talking about mathematically impossible scenario, okay? The numbers are unrealistic. I mean, it's just, you can do this research yourself, but it's like, there's so many zeros to the power of, it's so wild, it's so mathematically insane of the likelihood of this, where there's no life and it's just matter and elements, and they collide and then they create life. But not only is life created, if you will, from this, I guess, just pure chance, which chance isn't even a thing. Chance isn't a thing. It's just a way of trying to explain something, I guess, that is extremely unlikely. And you get life, but you don't just get life. You get life that it has the ability right away to reproduce life. So how much greater, how much astronomically higher is that number when we think about the mathematical impossibility of just creating life, but the very first life form that would be created through this, if you will, kind of combustion of things, right, has to already have the ability to procreate already. That's wild when you think about it. And it has to, now think about this, it already has to have the ability to procreate. You start with this, the single-cell organism, and then we're realizing now single-cell organisms are highly, highly complex. I mean, the complexity is to a degree that you can't just get to like, okay, it's so simple now, we can't see any more complexity. It's to the point to where we don't have the ability to fully investigate how complex the most simple things that we think are just simple truly are. With that, you have to have life created spontaneously from non-life, with the ability to procreate. So this quote unquote single cell organism, right, whatever, has to have the ability to split. Not only does it have to have the ability, it actually has to do it with no initiative, no instruction, but it spontaneously comes into existence with the ability and the inclination or desire, or, if you will, even unconscious goal of multiplication. I don't. Maybe it's missed on you. Maybe it's missed on you. And not only does it have to have the ability to multiply and then actually multiply, but it has to have the ability to mutate and to acquire skills and abilities that, where does it come from? You say, well, it evolved to develop that ability. That's a fancy way of saying you don't know, okay? That's a fancy way of saying you don't have an answer. So you say, well, I just refuse to accept the other answer, there's a God. Okay, well, then you continue with that because it's absolutely, it defies, the laws of logic. When you think about how do you obtain knowledge and truth, you're having to willfully suppress the fact that when we look at an effect, it has to have a cause. And so what you're saying is that something that can't cause life, non-life, has caused life. Again, to me, that shows that you're unstable intellectually, because you're willfully suppressing something that is obvious. So he points out, too, the universe's delicately balanced conditions that make human life not only possible but actual. I've kind of alluded to that already, but it's so much more complex than that. It's kind of this called the Goldilocks principle, when all these elements and aspects of creation of the universe have to be perfect, and like perfect here on Earth for life. And then, of course, there's this idea that, well, there could be other planets that have life on. Okay, whatever. That's not even the point of the discussion. In some ways, that may even strengthen the argument. I don't know. That's not the point. But the point is think about how delicately balanced, even the slightest minute change. So you have to have a universe that is perfectly balanced for life. Perfectly attuned for it, right? Then you have life comes out of nothing. And then you have to have a universe that stays, and particularly, with planet Earth, that stays particularly fine-tuned. So you have this perfect fine-tuning of the environment. And that environment, how did it get fine-tuned? Just about a lot of collision, a lot of time, a lot of chance. Okay, sure. So it gets perfectly fine-tuned. And then life spontaneously shows up, and it maintains this fine-tuning. How does this happen? I think it's obvious to us happens. Then you got consciousness. That in itself, atheism cannot explain. Simply cannot. Atheism has no answer. We get all this stuff. Well, we've tested, brains and the way the brain operates. Good. That's good. I'm glad we're doing that. That's what it means to claim dominion. We're understanding more and more about the brain. But where does consciousness come from? Well, it's just from the brain. Okay, I understand that the brain is an essential component when it comes to, obviously, when we think, and our thinking and our feeling. But where does consciousness come from? That's just the product of the brain. So the brain evolves and develops a consciousness. Well, think about that. So not only does the very first life form have within itself the ability to, procreate, but it has the desire to, but then it develops this ability to, well, one, not only understand and know what happened, but to develop consciousness. You think about it. Consciousness in itself, you need to, first of all, define it. And in defining it, talk about its origins, its purpose. It's just a product of evolution. And that's just, again, it's an easy way out. It's kind of it's intellectually dishonest. What about objective moral values? I've hammered this point over and over. Human dignity, value, and purpose. Again, I've touched on that, so I'm not going to go over it again. What worldview best accounts for these above matters? So let's talk about a couple of these worldviews then. Let's see which one best accounts for it. You have naturalism. All that exists is nature. There's no God, no supernatural realm. Nope. Doesn't provide a significant explanation, doesn't even provide a decent explanation of any of that. We have pantheism. All reality is ultimately one, many gods and many spirits. No, doesn't either. But then you have theism. There's a creator that is distinct from the creative order. Well, now wait a minute. Now I think we're heading in the right direction. So let me leave you with this. I know that I come out strong. I say some strong things, and some of you, that's difficult for you because you were taught that basically Christians are to take the low ground and they're to be, they're to constantly turn the other cheek, which, by the way, you ought to do a little more research on what it means to turn the other cheek. It means that if culturally speaking in that day and time, it means don't slap me like I'm a slave or lesser. If you're going to slap me like I'm an equal. So let's shed a little light on that. So no, Christians aren't supposed to be doormats. We do have the high ground. You say, well, if you're not nice to people, you'll never win anybody for Christ. Well, that's sort of nonsense. Now, by the way, you shouldn't be, you shouldn't be hateful to people. I would say that. Someone say rude. Well, that depends on who's defining what rude is. Okay, so I'm just not going to buy into this hyper effeminate. We need to bow down and be doormats if we're going to win the world for Christ. No, we need to proclaim truth and we need to point out error if we're going to win the world for Christ. And I think part of doing that is just, hitting things head on and directly. Ultimately, this is for the glory of God and because Jesus Christ is King. So because he's King, I'm not going to make excuses. Look, we're not going to be doormats. We're not going to placate. We're not going to shy away. We're not going to, and definitely not retreat. We're not going to retreat from these conversations. We're not going to pretend like that we've got the low ground and we're just begging for somebody just to throw us some crumbs from the heights of intellectual atheism. No, I don't think so. Absolutely not. In fact, the truth is we hold the intellectual high ground, and the atheist is down picking up crumbs and trying to basically build a structure, a superstructure that cannot be sustained. It falls on its own weight, and nothing there holding it up, and there will be no surrender. Why? We will not surrender the high ground. I think for the past 40 years, we've seen that, effeminate men leading churches, leading denominations, and we've surrendered the high ground. We will not surrender the high ground. We hold it. We hold the high ground. At the heights of the intellectual high ground, the scientists climb and climb and climb. And when they get there, they find who've been standing there all along are a couple theologians. Well, until next time, Jesus Christ is King.